So I made a horror short for this year's Candy Bowl. Candy Bowl is a yearly friendly film competition / online film festival thingy hosted by YouTuber Nightmind. My short film is called His Basement, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down how I went about creating it, from idea to finished product. This video that you're watching right now is heavily inspired by the way David F. Sandberg, also known as Pony Smasher, also known as director of Jump Scare the Movie and Kablam, does breakdowns of how he creates his short films over at his YouTube channel. Linking it in the card up in the corner, you should go check that out if you haven't. But my inspiration from David doesn't stop at this making off video. My inspiration actually goes a bit deeper than that, for you see, I wanted to go outside of my own comfort zone with this short, and I decided to take inspiration from the formula that David often uses in his shorts. But before we get there, let's establish what is my comfort zone. I like handheld camera work, found footage style cinematography, and using natural lights, sound on location, and analog distortions to stylize my footage. I use this aesthetic a lot, both because it's one that I genuinely enjoy, but also because it's a very forgiving medium to work in. The production is fast. Conceptualizing the thing is just thinking, well, what do I have access to right now, and then using that. Shooting the thing is a matter of picking up whatever closest available camera I have around me, and editing the thing is a matter of doing jump cuts when I see fit and smoothing problem areas over with some sort of distortion or glitch. So summarized, my usual way of working is great for getting results and getting them fairly quickly, but it doesn't lend itself very well for creating a more, clean or cinematic look, whatever that means. So, like I said, for this short film, I wanted to move away from that usual way of working and instead try to do something a little bit more, let's say, classic. David is the first to admit himself that his short films usually follow a very similar formula. A woman, played by David's girlfriend Lotta, is alone but realizes that she isn't alone, and towards the end of the short we usually get a glimpse of what it is that's there with her. So when I sat down together with my girlfriend, not named Lotta, to conceptualize this short, we started with location. Pretty soon we landed on this room in our attic that is used as a space to hang clothes after you've washed them in the room next door. In this room there are several doors. I guess people are renovating or changing out their doors, and this is a good place to leave them. But this sparked the idea that what if you were to find a door that's not supposed to be there, that you can actually go into, or even worse, that something can actually come out of. So we had our idea. After workshopping it for a little bit, we landed on something we both liked and started production. Now, the first thing I wanted to do was to create a previs for the entire short. This is something that I like to do to kind of figure out the story beats and what shots I'll need when we go to actually shoot the real thing. So we headed up to the attic one evening with just an old iPad and two pieces of props that are important to tell the story, I guess. My Sony VX1000 camcorder and a cardboard box. We then shot the whole thing without putting really any thoughts into lighting or complicated camera work. I just made sure to shoot most shots from at least a couple of different angles, so I could then in editing choose what kind of works best. Once that was done, I edited that down into a short, and we now had a good idea of what we needed when we went to actually shoot it. This pre-visualization version, by the way, is available on my Patreon for anyone that wants to check that out. Now, before we get to talking about shooting the actual short, I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about the gear I used to shoot this film. I'm not much of a gear head, and with my usual style of, guerrilla filmmaking, I usually only need something that has decent visual clarity and a good autofocus. So throwing together a good cinematic setup from the stuff I have laying around isn't really optimal, but here's what I ended up using. We shot it all on the Canon HFG60, which is my main camera that I use for all my YouTube videos since I got it a few months back. It's a decent camera for what it is. It has 4K, which is very important to me because when doing something like this, I know I'm going to be doing it in 1080p, which means that if I film it in 4K, I can recrop the shots when I don't get them perfectly on location, which happens a lot when you're a one-man team, at least for me. And quick confession here, while I do grasp the basics, I'm not really great with stuff like shutter speed, gain, ISO, all of that. I've just never been super interested in that technical side of things. And when I do create something or operate a camera where it's necessary to do those sort of settings, I hate diving into menus to change them, which is why I've always leaned towards camcorders over DSLRs. Physical buttons for changing settings is just really nice, and also the stabilization is just much more reliable on these things. That being said, that's how I like to do things, and as you can probably tell if you've seen the final film, I did struggle a whole lot for some shots with stuff like white balance, brightness levels, and gain control, but more on that when we get to the editing. For lights, I just used this construction lamp that I bought for like 20 bucks at some point, and I hot glued it into a wooden frame and I put it on a tripod with this makeshift softbox, and this like $10 LED light, which I just put on another tripod, and I threw a rice ball lamp over it to diffuse it a little bit. All the behind the scenes footage is filmed with my old Canon XA10. This thing is a workhorse, and if it wasn't for the fact that its image quality is very dated at this point, I would still be using it because it's just so nice to work with. It has XLR mic inputs, great stabilization, built-in memory, so you don't even need SD cards. But yeah, like I said, and as you can probably see from the behind-the-scenes footage, it is like grainy and looks just soft. This camera came out in like 2010, so it's pretty dated by now. The dolly I built the day before the actual shoot. This dolly is also based on David's guide on how to make a shitty dolly. It's just a piece of wood, some angled brackets, skateboard wheels, and PVC tubing that I then placed a tripod on. I modified it by putting some hooks down here so I could put elastic bands over it to hold the tripod and camera down a little more securely, and I put a toolbox on it to give it some more weight. I also have a sheep slider that I got from like AliExpress or something, and I've never used it before, but for this project I used it every now and then to get just smaller motion when the whole dolly was necessary. For audio, we didn't really record any on set. I mean, I had the camera's built-in microphone, but that sounds terrible, so we went back a few days later and I took my Rode Video Mic Go and I plugged it into my Zoom H2N, and then I just used the cold shoe adapters on this phone rig to be able to kind of hold the microphone without making too much handling noise. And yeah, we just stepped through the entire scene, or the entire short, I guess. And that's about it in terms of gear. I guess I can mention real quickly that the prop camera we use is the Sony VX1000, and I swear I'll at some point make a video about this camera because it just holds a very special place in my heart, but it also has a pretty cool and interesting cultural value, I think, but more on that some other time. The shooting was pretty straightforward. We shot it pretty much chronologically, with a couple of small exceptions here and there. Two things to point out here. One is that we started to shoot around like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, at which point the sun was high in the sky and we had great light coming in through the window. But when we were done shooting, it was pretty late at night, which means that it was completely dark outside the window at that point. This ended up working fine, since the gradual darkness of the shots kinda matches how the character gets more and more scared and isolated as the presence of the monster increases. Or I'm just making up excuses because I couldn't be bothered to tape over the window and set a light over there. Who knows? The second one is that we had 2 shots that needed our cat to be in it. Our cat's name is Horse, and she is just a master of knocking things over and causing different sorts of mayhem. She's a cat. It's something that she literally always does, and she especially does it if you pull out a laser pointer, except for when we needed her to do it. I don't know, I think it was a little stressful for her to be up in this new big room and have all these things around her to explore. And the few times where we did get her to run into the things that we wanted her to knock over, they didn't fall. So we ended up getting just a couple of shots of her jumping off the box, running around a bit, chasing me, holding a string. And then I filmed myself knocking the vase over. And I messed myself out of that shot, rotoscoped Horse back from her shot and put her over the clip of the vase falling. I tried to sync it up somewhat, and it works fine, but if you look closely at the shot, it's a little wonky. All that to say, when you're working with animals, or kids for that matter, take the time you think you need and double it, and then add another half of the initial time, and then you got a time frame in which you might get the shots you need if you're lucky. I knew that from before. I don't know why I didn't apply it to this, but you live and you learn. Now, for the editing. So the basic editing was pretty straightforward if you've ever edited anything at all. I placed the best looking shots in chronological order, and I made cuts where I saw fit to try to make things go together as well as possible. There are some continuity errors here and there, which to me isn't really a problem. I've never really been too fussed with those sort of things. To quote the film Ed Wood, "Nobody will notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details, it's about the big picture." For the music, I used Epidemic Sound, and this video is not sponsored by Epidemic, although I would love that, please hit me up. But yeah, Epidemic Sound really is by far the best audio library I've ever used. I love that you can download the different instruments separately from all the songs. It's great. And like I said before, most of the audio was recorded after the fact and then synced in, which can be a tedious process, and with a pretty tight deadline, I didn't maybe quite have time to put in as much work as I might have wanted to blend all the sound effects and add in every single footstep, but I think it works okay overall, all things considered. Now let's talk about the effect shots, because I guess that's the most interesting part. I left that for last, I don't know why, but there are quite a few effect shots in this film, and they're all made in different ways. So let's go through them chronologically, starting with some door shots and working our way towards the creature. So we knew we wanted a really tall door attached to this wall, and we knew we wanted the clips to be handheld and seen through the protagonist's camera. So before we even started, we knew it would require a bunch of tracking. What we did was that we placed a real door against the wall to use as a reference. And in retrospect, I wonder if it hadn't been better to just maybe take a few reference photos of the wall with the real door there, and then move that out of the way and like tape some tracking markers to the wall instead. But I don't know. It probably would have been better, but we didn't do that. Now, I'm decently well versed in After Effects and with Element 3D, and I know some basics in Blender, but Sonia knows Blender quite well, so we basically decided to treat the shots we wanted on like a shot-for-shot basis and just use whatever technique fit best for the specific shot rather to do them all in the same way. This was partly due to time constraints again, since I had more time to work on my shots than Sonia did for the ones that she was gonna do. But I'm not as proficient in Blender as she is, so I decided to do mine mostly as 2D or 2.5D with After Effects quasi 3D environment, while Sonia went for creating a full 3D model of the door and actually tracking it in 3D space in Blender. For some of my shots, I used her 3D model and I imported it into After Effects and comped it in using Element 3D, but for a lot of them I used just PNG images tracked on top of the footage with various results. Let's quickly break down a few of the different shots. For this one, I tracked the shot and added 2 PNG images that I took with my phone of the door trims, and I added that to the sides of the real door, and then I just duplicated the real door and put it on top so that I extended it upwards, so it's just PNG layers in 2D space. For this one, I used Sonia's 3D model, and then I also just added 2 black squares on each side right behind it, and I blurred them to create some like contact shadow. This shot was done by Sonia in Blender by actually tracking the whole shot and adding it in, with even doing the beam that covers part of the door there. And then I just took that and did the final composite and tried to match the grain and motion blur. For the 3 shots of the hand closing up on the door, I rotoscoped Sonia's hand out, and then I added door trims or even an entirely new door into the shot, and then I put Sonia's hand back on top of everything. If you look closely, you can definitely see the difference in handles from when I used the 3D model and when it's just the actual handle. This shot was tricky, again due to time constraints, both while filming and also while editing, When we filmed it, I filmed it too dark to get a good track on it, and we tried several times, and both in Blender and After Effects, and grading the footage different ways, but we just couldn't really get it to work. And deadline was closing in, so I knew I had to get something done fast. So I used an app called BlenderTrack that lets you import data from your phone's camera into Blender. And I just filmed basically a quick clip on our living room floor where I just panned the camera upwards. Then I brought it into Blender and quickly added some still frames from some of the other clips onto some planes and some basic geometry, and I threw in the 3D model that Sonia had made of the door. Now looking at it like this, it does not look good. But it works in a pinch, and I knew for a fact that despite trying to move out of my comfort zone, I was going to be covering this with a bunch of grain and distortion and stuff, so in a pinch, it worked. Once all the shots were done, I basically put them all together in a timeline and exported them as a file. And then I went and projected it onto our bedroom wall. I set the VX1000 up on a tripod and filmed them like that, essentially faking that these shots were actually taken on the VX1000 and hopefully given some texture to the video that can be felt isn't just some digital filter. I like doing stuff like this to bring some more tangible or, I don't know, physical distortions to stuff that is supposed to look old or amateur. And personally, I think you can just feel that it isn't just some overlay. And then finally, there's the creature. So the last shots that we grabbed on set was of me in my underwear wearing this Halloween mask I ordered off of Amazon and doing a bunch of weird motions in the corner of the room. I then rotoscoped myself out from the background and exported that as PNG images. I brought one of those into Photoshop and I altered it to make it look, more spooky. I then handed it over to Sonia as a reference frame, and she's much better than me at design and Photoshop and stuff. She's an actual animator, so makes sense. And she converted 3 or 4 frames, I think, into monster frames. I then ran all the original frames and the new monster frames through a program called Absinthe, which is a program that people a lot of the time call an AI program, but there's no AI here. Always bothers me. But what it does is that it takes your reference frames and it tries to basically paste that art on top of every frame. It's a great software. YouTuber Joel Haver uses it for his animations famously. But it can also be used for some visual effects, like in this case. Once Absinthe had done its thing, I brought it back into After Effects and I did some tweaking. I slowed the footage down a bit to make it feel more natural, seeing how the monster is supposedly quite a bit larger than Sonia. And look, I'm no expert on physics, but I think larger things are supposed to move slower, at least if I've understood correctly when watching Corridor Crew. Finally, I rotoscoped that out once again. I enlarged the head a little bit, did some tweaking here and there. And I exported it, went to the shot of Sonia, managed to track the footage after some work. This was also a very dark shot, but thank God it worked after some struggling. And then I just finally placed me as the monster into the background and color graded it, matched grain. And to be honest, I'm pretty satisfied with how this shot came out. Some of the other effect shots are kind of so-so, but I'm really stoked about this one. It looks good. And that's it, I think, for the whole film. At the end, I tried color grading to match all the different lightings throughout the entire short. And instead of trying to denoise my footage to get rid of all that graininess, I decided to lean into it and add even more noise to the whole thing to give it kind of like a gritty feeling. And that's it. Overall, I think the short turned out fine. I feel like I've made things that are better, but I feel that it could have been worse. And I guess here at the end I should have some sort of main takeaway, and for me the main takeaway is that I shouldn't be beating myself up over the fact that some of the effect shots aren't great, or that some of the footage is a little underexposed or whatever, I had fun making it, and without getting too cheesy, I kind of feel like, well, better create something that might not turn out great than to have not created something at all. And that goes to, everyone. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Just do it. Sometimes it'll be great. You'll learn some stuff and then you'll move on. That's the message I have. Okay. If you watched this far into this nerdy adventure, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that you chose to watch this video out of all the hundreds of videos on YouTube. I swear to God, there's got to be at least 500-600 videos on this website, which is, crazy. please consider joining my Patreon. I'm a poor baby boy. I would like to be able to do more stuff like this and also eat dinner and pay rent, you know, all the stuff. But yeah, then do all the YouTube stuff as well. Subscribe, like the video, all that. Leave a comment. It can say whatever. It's just good for the algorithm. And that's all I have. I'll see you in the next video, which will be not at all like this one. Okay, see ya. Ooh, it's been a hectic month getting the short film together and this behind the scenes and everything. And hopefully my own little Halloween video. Hopefully that'll come out on Halloween. You'll know when you see this, probably. Whatever. Thank you so much. These are my co-producers. And other than the co-producers, there are also all the other cast and crew that support me on Patreon. Thank you very much to those of you who do that. I really appreciate it. And out of everyone there, we got some new friends since the last video, which is Toby Ta, Bram, Mungo Jackson. That's a great name. Octorock on Rakrath, which is I feel like I gotta say it like Rakrath. It's some Lovecraftian being kind of, and the Unstoppable Juggleknob. And I feel like I've seen the Unstoppable Juggleknob being mentioned in some other person's Patreon outro thing, or it's just one of those names. But welcome to those of you who are new, to those of you who aren't, thank you so much for supporting. I know I already did a little outro speech, and this is like a second outro speech, but that's just how things go sometimes. Now I need to go work on the Halloween video, and yeah, intense month. Thank you so much. Again, see ya.